Welcome to Business Europe. Well, we're joined today by one of the world's leading voices on artificial intelligence, innovation, and the future of work. For more than 3 decades, Rob Garlick has been at the forefront of technological and economic forces reshaping the global economy. Well, during a distinguished career at Citi, he held a series of senior leadership positions, including head of innovation, technology, and the future of work, and previously head of research for Europe, the Middle East, and Africa, all helping guide some of the world's biggest investors and business leaders through periods of profound change. Well, his work has examined everything from the rise of the internet and the Google era to the explosive growth of artificial intelligence, robotics, and automation. Today, governments, boards, investors, and multinational companies seek his insights on one of the defining questions of our age. How will AI transform the way we live, work, and create wealth? Well, his research on AI and the future of work has been read and debated around the world, earning him a reputation as one of the most influential thinkers in the field. As AI accelerates at pace then few predicted, and businesses and governments grapple with both the opportunities and risks ahead, there are few people better placed to help us understand where this revolution may lead. Rob Garlick, welcome to the programme. Great to see you, great to have you with us. Look, I think it's fair to say, Rob, that you've become many things to many people. How do you, though, describe what you do, and how did it all begin?
Well, after 30 years of the front row of capitalism in investment banking and asset management, I've now pivoted into the world of trying to work out how we navigate AI's change. And that includes the world of work and includes the world of leadership. And obviously, some of the outcomes here in terms of how AI impacts us all could be extremely positive or it could be extremely negative, and I'm trying to make sure we build the bridges towards the positive side of that. I, having spun out, wrote a book exactly on this topic, AI anarchy or abundance, and it's really solution focused. What are we going to do that's going to be positive?
Yeah, interesting. AI anarchy or abundance. In your mind then, what are the positives that you mention, and what do you call the negatives?
So the negatives is fairly obvious, that we are in unprecedented times in terms of this being a technology that's so much more progressive than other technologies that can substitute for vast amounts of people. And we've already seen how this played out in blue collar work in terms of, kind of people losing roles to automation and robotics. But we're about to see this play out not just in white collar work and knowledge work, but also in a whole vast array of other blue collar jobs as well, as robots start moving around us. And so that leads to potentially a huge amount of job substitution. And obviously that could lead to ramifications for people's lives and their livelihoods and their families. It could actually be much worse than that. I mean, you could see a situation where wages collapse for a lot of people. And that for societies, there's something called economic singularity. But if you start seeing wages collapse because technology can do things so much cheaper than humans, you have an issue for what that means for consumption, for what that means for income tax, what that means for asset prices, etc. So there are a few of the things. We can talk about them more. The other side of this is obviously it is possible to use these new tools to have a new renaissance, to basically allow us to do so many more things. And in that, what we could also do is we can free people up from doing the mundane tasks, the dirty tasks, the dangerous tasks, to doing things that they want, a life of leisure. I would caution, though, in terms of the life of leisure, that we've sort of seen this play out a little bit with what happened with horses when the tractor and the cars came about. Unfortunately, 88% of horses were economically useless, and they went down in terms of their population by almost 90%. So 10% had great luxury and abundance living in fields and a life of leisure. And I think the way that this AI revolution could play out is that you get a few people who are doing extremely well and a lot of people who are not. And I think that is not a good outcome, and that will lead to backlash. And how do we make sure we mitigate that?
Okay, so Rob, is AI as an entity a new invention then, or are we just seeing new forms that are rapidly impacting our lives? For example, generative AI.
So AI started in the 1950s and it's been through several iterations. But there's a thing in the world of investing and technology called Amara's law, which is basically people overestimate the short term and underestimate the long term. And what you found is that AI was sort of bumbling along in an area that a lot of people didn't really kind of see or realize. So good at pattern recognition, dealing with large numbers, etc. But was starting to power things like your recommendations of what you get if you go onto Amazon or alternatively to Netflix or alternatively to Google. So it was sort of working behind the scenes. What's happening now is it's coming away from behind the scenes into the front of the scenes. And, driverless cars are an example of that. I mean, the first driverless car started, I think, in 2004. But actually now, Waymo are doing 500,000 trips per week without a driver in there. So the technology is starting to work. And then your point on generative AI, I think that was the sort of wake up moment for people all around the world, because suddenly you could see that this ChatGPT, in this case, in the back end of 2022, something in your pocket could answer more questions and translate things and everything else better than you can. And then quickly what happened, unfortunately, is it could pass more exams than anyone that you and I know can. And so it suddenly started sort of thinking, hang on a minute, this is starting to move into my area. And quickly, ChatGPT reached, 1 billion users. Well, the next stage is turning that language into actually doing useful things. And that can be good, but it can also be quite confronting if it takes things away from you. So basically, the answer is it's not new, or generative AI is new, but AI is not new, but it's starting to do more and more. And one of the tricky things that we have to face is that it's doing more and more at exponential speed. It's almost impossible for us humans to be able to keep up with the speed and the rate of change. And that creates a bit of an issue for our transition to what happens next.
And Rob, what do you think the impact of this new wave of AI actually is on workplaces, leadership, and crucially, all of us, employees?
Well, one of the obvious things that's happening right now is there's an enormous amount of anxiety around it, what it might mean. So just as an example, there was a recent survey 31% of people in finance and 32% in technology, I think it's that way around, feel they won't have a job in the next 5 years' time. Now, I don't think that's the case, but obviously anxiety is rising. The rate of change is rising. That's quite difficult for people to deal with. What's called the intensification of work. These new tools allow you to do more, but firms expect you to do more. So basically, you kind of have to spin the wheel faster and faster. So there's several things that are potentially in play here. It is also quite difficult for leaders to navigate this as well. It's not that leaders can't make sure that enough people are looked after in this process, because absolutely they can. But we have an economic system that's what's called a plutocracy. It's run by the wealthy, which is essentially that if you have a lot of shares, you get the votes. And so democracies are one person, one vote. Plutocracies are the economic system is basically captured by a few people. And the capitalist system basically drives for more profitability. And so we have a fault line here, which is that leaders naturally default to generate more profit. And one of the ways of generating more profit is potentially substituting for people with technology. And so how do we make sure that these two things come together and are going to benefit the most people rather than few, is back to the kind of thing we talked about earlier. And that really does come down to leadership, but also it comes down to the incentivization of leadership. And that actually, when I wrote the book, probably is the biggest issue. And I do think that capitalism, which is in its third iteration at the moment, probably will need to iterate in the future away from the shareholder primacy that we've had for the last sort of 50 plus years.
And what's the main takeaway from the book, Rob? How do you want people who read it to go away and think about technology and how to integrate it into their lives, their workplaces? So
on this journey of understanding how AI is going to impact work, which I started over a decade ago, I think I started off as more worried about what could happen. And then in time, I've become more of what I call a proactive optimist. We can be optimistic based on doing stuff. So what I did in the book was I surfaced, we do have lots of options. There are actually over 130 different options that I surface in the book. Now, when you put a lot of those things out there, people kind of need a framework to understand that. So I then put it into a framework, and the framework's called the BEST framework with double S in the middle. And just as an example, B starts with better jobs. How do we create better jobs for people? It's very possible to do that. And it starts by saying that is a goal, and how are we going to ask people what will make their job better, and enacting some of those things. And so really it's basically trying to say to people, we have lots of options. A, be aware of them because we're going to need some of these options. B, try and then prioritize what they are. But also when I talk about leadership, it also comes down to some self-leadership. So the front cover is deliberately a sort of a combination of an inspired Einstein image, which I can explain, but also Uncle Sam, kind of, your country needs you. And because we all have individual choices, this might be who you choose to work for. It might be who you choose to buy from. It might be who you choose to vote from. It might be the type of values that you think are important in society. So, for example, we could have lots of people doing care work going forward, a very human skill, but are we going to value that? And so these are sort of choices that each of us have to make. But I think what we mustn't do is mustn't sleepwalk passively into just accepting that this is AI is going to take over everything and everything, the future is predetermined. It's not. We have a choice, and that's what the book basically talks about.
Rob, we thank you very much indeed for joining us, and thanks to all of you too for watching. Do join us again next time for more Business Europe.